What was Jeroboam's sin that was never corrected and ultimately led to Israel's captivity? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 25 to 33. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 25. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning at verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, Now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their lord Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set one up in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines in the high places, and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel, and offered sacrifices on the altar, and burnt incense. Israel has now split into 2 nations, the northern tribes into the nation of Israel, and the southern tribes into the nation of Judah. The nation of Judah included the tribe of Benjamin, which for all intents and purposes had been subsumed by Judah, at least politically. And such is also true in the north, where Ephraim, at least politically, comes to represent the northern nation. It's not that the tribal identification was no longer important on a family level, but when it comes to the overall identification of the nation, the individual tribes will rarely be referred to, rather settling for their names of Israel and Judah. And from here on out in 1st and 2nd Kings, that is how we will refer to them too. Beginning in verse 25, we get the first transition between talking about the kings of Judah versus the kings of Israel, when we transition from talking about Rehoboam being told by God not to assemble an army to fight Israel, to talking about the first acts of Jeroboam as king of Israel. In fact, from here to the latter third of chapter 14, we will be focused on the events of Jeroboam, not returning to Rehoboam until then. Why? Because these events will shape Israel's history from here until they are taken captive by Assyria just over 200 years from now. As king, Jeroboam was responsible for building up Shechem, much like Solomon built up Jerusalem, which would be the capital of Israel for about 50 years until Omri moved it to Samaria, where it would remain until Israel's captivity. Jeroboam also built up Penuel, the city on the east side of the Jordan River that Gideon had torn down about 250 years before for defying him in his chase of the Midianite kings. If this is all that Jeroboam had done, then all would have been well with him. But alas, there was more. You see, the temple was still in Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, and it had been the mandated place of worship for well over 25 years now. The young people in Jeroboam's kingdom had known nothing different. And those who were older, that did, would have remembered the tabernacle being in Gibeon, a city too that was within the boundaries of Judah. Jeroboam's fear was that if the people went down to Judah at least 3 times a year to offer sacrifices in the spring and the fall, they might long for reunification under Rehoboam. And so, because of this, Jeroboam decided to set up golden calves at Dan in the north and Bethel in the south for Israel to come and worship at and offer their sacrifices. In this, Jeroboam opted for convenience and comfort over truth, the same sin that many religious people engage in even to this day. Now, it was bad enough that Jeroboam set up these calves, But then to tell Israel that these were the gods that brought them out of Egypt was even worse. From their own history, they would have known the calamity that befell their ancestors when at Mount Sinai their ancestors worshipped a golden calf, and yet here they are told to do just that. God cannot be represented by anything that man can make, which is why idolatry is wrong, for all idols must represent false gods that we have created. In worshiping these idols, Israel was breaking the second commandment against worshiping idols, and as long as they did so, could not have communion with God. This sin of Jeroboam, the sin of idolatry, was the sin that was never corrected and would ultimately lead Israel further on down the road of sin in the future and lead to their captivity by Assyria. It will be Jeroboam's epitaph when introducing most of the kings of Israel, and it is what he is most remembered for by students of the Bible. Setting up idol worship, though, wasn't going to be enough, for Judah had the festivals at which to come and offer special sacrifices. The Feast of Passover in the first month of the year, the Feast of Weeks 50 days later, and the Feast of Tabernacles in the 7th month of the year, with the Feast of Tabernacles being preceded shortly before by the Day of Atonement. What feasts would Jeroboam set up? Well, the one that is mentioned is the feast that would mirror the Feast of Tabernacles, with the difference being that Israel observed it on the 15th day of the 8th month rather than the 15th day of the 7th month. Why the difference? Well, a lot of possible reasons are given by commentators, such as the 8th month being closer to the time of ingathering in the north than the 7th month was, but in reality it doesn't matter. What Jeroboam's actions show is that departure from truth in one area leads to departure from truth in others. The one true church of the New Testament was not the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, or any other denomination created by man. It was the church that was of Christ, the people of God who followed the truth. Those who erred from the truth first drifted off in one area, beginning with the authority of bishops, which led to further error, which later formed the Catholic Church and all the other false denominational churches that came after it. The religion of Jeroboam began with moving the place of worship and idolatry, then the feasts, later evolving into a religion that looked nothing like the religion established by God at Mount Sinai. It was an abomination to God, which led to Israel's destruction, just as the false worship of today is an abomination to God, which will ultimately lead to judgment on those who participate in it. Had Jeroboam simply trusted in God, who had promised him an enduring house as long as he followed him, all this could have been avoided, and who knows how future events would have changed. But alas, Jeroboam led Israel off into sin, and the rest, as they say, is history. God, however, didn't abandon Israel at the first sight of idolatry. He would send a prophet to warn Jeroboam of his sin. We'll get the record of that, beginning the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Kings chapter 13, verses 1 to 10, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.